Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the March 8th monthly meeting of the House Opportunities Commission monthly meeting on March 8th. I'm Lloyd Priest, Chair of the Commission. I'm joined by my fellow commissioners, Frank Kelleher, Vice Chair, Nick Nelson, Jeffrey Merkowitz, Chair Pro Tem. First meeting as a Chair Pro Tem. Welcome. Commissioner Jackie Simon and Commissioner Pamela Bird. I've been advised by Commissioner Linda Kroom that she will not be able to attend the meeting today because she has an event at school related to STEM. And I told her it was important to keep our young people involved in moving forward with STEM, so we understand why she's not able to be here with us today. We want to we have a quorum present. The agenda has been presented. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, we will proceed with, we got no indications that there was anyone who wanted to speak at the community forum. So we'll proceed to the report of the executive director. I want to welcome Chelsea Andrews, who's our executive director, and also Kaylee Brown, who's our deputy, and also members of the staff. I also want to, before we start, just acknowledge that this is Women's Month. And we want to acknowledge all of the women and all the important roles they play in our families and our community. And also especially thank our commissioners for the tireless work that they've given over these many years to advance the work for HOC. And thank the staff and all the women who do so many things in our community and in our homes. So thank you all very much. And we'll proceed with the agenda report from our executive director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, commissioners, members of the public, and HOC team. I am going to provide a report in regards to our activities in the month of February. The slide here gives an overview of the areas that I will highlight. I look forward to sharing with you information related to the work that we've done around CDBG, which is the Community Development Block Grant Relief Program, and our COVID-19 disaster relief support. We also have legislative updates, highlights from our Resident Services Division, highlights from our Housing Resource Division, real estate development activities, highlights from Mortgage Finance, and our Finance Division updates. We're also going to give you a preview of some of the work that we've been doing and presentations that we've had before the County Council. Next slide. I'll start with providing you with some good news in regards to our outreach efforts related to our tenants and our desire to move forward with lease enforcement activities. As you may recall, at our last meeting, we discussed the fact that we had over $11 million worth of rental arrearages, and we're going to begin to have to take steps to pursue lease enforcement activity, but not without doing so in a manner that allowed us to provide our clients and residents with as many resources as possible to remain housed. And also not without ensuring that we engaged our partners, partners across this county who work to support our residents first. And so I'm pleased to share that on February 9th, we conducted a virtual meeting with many of our partners, nonprofit partners, county partners, and others interested in supporting our efforts to apprise them of the next steps that we were getting ready to take, encourage them to talk to their clients about taking advantage of resources. It was very well attended and very well received. We then also had 3 resident engagement virtual meetings, which were went exceptionally well. They were webinars where our residents were able to join in the evening and learn information about the CDBG rent relief program, and have an opportunity to also hear about the resident services resources that we have available. It included presentations from multiple divisions, opportunities for Q&A, As you can see, we had over 116 attendees in our first session, and also over the next two sessions had approximately 76 in February 23rd meeting. And then on the March 2nd meeting, we also had Spanish interpretation available. That was a longer meeting, but we made sure that we availed this opportunity to our Spanish speakers and had an opportunity to share with them the resources as well. In addition to those meetings, we sent out information. We also conducted one-on-one virtual meetings to assist any resident with completing an application, as well as guiding them to any other resources available. We met with all of our property management teams, managers, so that they also knew the process, and did an extensive amount of research, outreach. Very pleased to share that a result of those efforts were over 160 applications that we received and approximately $877,000 worth of delinquency balances that could potentially be applied to this program. And so very good result from that push. What the state wanted to see is that we could get some additional applications in, and we believe we've demonstrated that and have a good case for asking for additional time to try to continue this effort. And so our hope is that we will potentially do another round of this outreach, see if we can get even more people to take advantage of this resource, and also apply the funding that we receive from the county on top of these resources once we've exhausted every effort. But I just want to applaud our team, our compliance team, our IT team, communications, property management, our interpreters who did a great job in this effort, and thank them for that hard work, because it was definitely a wonderful resource that we provided to our residents. I want to also acknowledge that it really did open our eyes to the fact that residents will attend virtual meetings, and this is another way for us to engage with them. And so resident services took full advantage of the captive audience, and I'm certain we'll do so again in the near future. Next slide. We also have some good news as it pertains to our ongoing efforts for reimbursement for FEMA-related funding related to the COVID-19 disaster. Our finance team has submitted multiple applications, and we recently received notice that we will receive another $680,000 of reimbursements as a result of that effort. Now our total is $1.33 million worth of FEMA reimbursement. And so we, of course, are appreciative to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for this resource. We're appreciative for our state partners, and also personally appreciative of our finance team for continuing to seek these reimbursements. Next slide. In the month of February, we were heavily engaged in various legislation and advocacy efforts in Annapolis. This slide is a photo that reflects our efforts working in partnership with our colleagues across the state to advocate for additional funding. As you may know, we were advocating for $175 million in emergency rental assistance, along with asking the state to fully fund its programs. Recently, the County Council has also joined in this effort, and it's written a letter to Governor Moore asking for this $175 million in rental assistance. This was a great activity and engagement on behalf of HOC with our partners. We also testified in support of legislation that was introduced for a statewide voucher program, and testified and provided our support in both the House and the Senate legislations. And as you know, we've had ongoing engagement related to MC 1023, the Montgomery County Housing Opportunities Commission collective bargaining agreement implementation in regards to impasse arbitration. That legislation is moving forward, but we were successful in at least gaining some traction around amendments that would allow it to be a little bit more favorable and allow for some balance in regards to the decisions that may be rendered by an arbitrator. Next slide. We also, in the month of February, celebrated Valentine's Day across multiple properties. Here's a few slides reflecting the activities that took place at Cider Mill, Tanglewood, and Spring Garden, as well as Elizabeth House. Next slide. We also supported our residents in a customer-led Black History Month celebration program that occurred at Waverly House. This is a photo of that. Next slide. Our HOC Academy continues to have fun and enriching activities for our youth, and this is a highlight of one of their recent activities. And we do have 21 participants in the program, and as you can see in the slide, they've had a great deal of fun in the month of February with multiple activities, mad science, tie-dye studio, etc. Next slide. Our fatherhood initiative looks like they're also having a great deal of fun, really enjoying the iFly facility. And as you can see, in February, we had 31 fathers that graduated from the January cohort. And in the month of February, we had 40 fathers that were enrolled and will begin in March. So our program continues to thrive, and it really is a wonderful initiative for our fathers and for their children. Next slide. HCV program continues to do great work. I'll just highlight that our current utilization rate is 96%. You'll see in the slide and in the report provided many more details related to the number of families that we've issued vouchers for, as well as the number of families that we've pulled from the waiting list. But we continue to increase, and our efforts to increase our utilization are paying off. Next slide. Excited to share that we are near opening day, hopefully, at the Elizabeth Square Leggett property. We received on February 24th our use and occupancy permits. And final inspections are underway. We expect to reach substantial completion by mid-March and facilitate the first tenant move-ins before and or on April 1st. And so really looking forward to welcoming our new residents to that beautiful property and eventually celebrating with Mr. Leggett the naming and the ribbon cutting. We are working to secure that date, and you will be updated in the very near future, working with Mr. Leggett and his family on the date for that event. Next slide. We also are excited about the laureate. We are expecting our use and occupancy permits here this month, as well as substantial completion here in the month. And we expect that our final construction activities will be completed in the near future. This is also a property that is a hallmark property at Shady Grove Metro Station, and we expect that we'll be celebrating in June our ribbon cutting at this beautiful site as well. Next slide. Our mortgage finance team insisted that we provide this March update in February out of just sheer excitement and or relief that we have secured the funding through our issuance of bonds totaling $28.5 million under the 1996 indenture, and for the funding of the mortgage loan that was issued the following day, in the total of $27 million with the FHA risk share permanent mortgage loan, as well as the $1.5 million subordinate note. Both of these will be, of course, directed to our residents on the Lane property, and really excited to go to closing and needed to share that information and celebrate that here with you all today. Next slide. We also have good news as it pertains to the county's support for our capital improvements. We received on the consent budget, on the consent agenda, excuse me, budgeted items to support the work around the water, sewer line, and storm improvements at Elizabeth Square, totaling $520,000, as well as $1.5 million for demolition funding for Elizabeth House. We will come back to the board with more details in regards to next steps and securing the contractor to do that work, as well as the contribution, the minor contribution that would need to be compensated by HOC. But this is a great effort as it pertains to the county's support for that demolition. Next slide. We are really excited about our upcoming HOC procurement fair occurring on March 15th at Veterans Plaza in downtown Silver Spring. The last I heard, we are almost near capacity. I believe that we started, I want to say, in almost a week's time, had over 100 applicants or interested attendees apply. And this is an event that is going to really showcase us in our work and our opportunities to do business with us in a wonderful way. It will be an event that allows for general understanding of all of our procurement requirements, as well as our goals for minority participation, all of the work that we've been doing in that regard. And then there'll be breakout sessions that will allow for particular interests in terms of the types of work that we'll be doing in real estate, or the type of work that we'll be doing in some of our other contracting opportunities. So attendees were able to select what room they'd like to go into so that they could even learn more about the work that we do in that area, and what type of procurement opportunities are available and or will be available in the future. So really looking forward to that event. And then next slide. So we are going to do something a little different here. We have been presenting recently before the County Council on a number of occasions at the new committee that is chaired by Chair Friedson on Parks, Housing, Planning, Housing, and Parks. I've only been there every Monday. Has invited us on multiple occasions to present on the work we do, and we felt it best to make sure that we also provide these presentations to you as well. We them by way of sending them to the board, but today what we will do is a truncated version of those presentations so that not only our board but members of the public who are watching this board meeting will have an opportunity to hear and understand the work that we do. And so next slide. We'll start with the state of rental housing affordability in Montgomery County. We provided a presentation to the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee on January 30th. And I was joined by my colleague, Zachary Marks. We also had Kareem Brown as well, and provided an overview of our position and what we do to support affordable housing in the county. Next slide. We shared with the committee the work that we do and how we are structured in 4 different essentially segments: our public housing component, our housing finance agency component, the work that we do as an owner and an operator, as well as a public developer. We shared, of course, that we are led by a commission that's appointed by the county executive and confirmed by council, and provided details as it pertains to the work that we do under each of those arms of our agency. Next slide. We shared some interesting demographics. These are demographics that we currently have available as it pertains to individuals in our program. We are currently undergoing a deep dive as it pertains to our waiting list. Next slide. What you will see and what we already know is that our demographics look different than the county demographics. You note that there is a stark difference in terms of the number of Black and Brown individuals who are in our programs compared to the county. And so on the left, you'll see that there are 18% of the population, for example, in Montgomery County are Black or African American, where 59% of our participants and residents are African American. And you also see the Hispanic differential, as well as the differential in terms of individuals who are Caucasian in the county compared to those who are in our program. And I don't think that comes as any surprise. In fact, as we were providing our presentation, other presenters prior to us were showing and providing very similar demographics. These slides, of course, will come to you all after today's session, but just wanted to highlight them today for you. The next slide. This shows the age of individuals in our program. What you'll see is that we have a higher number of individuals with children compared to the county. So whereas the county's population under age 18 is 23%, we're at 32%. And this just demonstrates that our families definitely have needs related to children in larger spaces, etc. Next slide. This slide shows that the majority of individuals in our properties and with our voucher program are women, and again, a larger population than reflected in the county. Next slide. Here we provide information related to the average household income, and it demonstrates how much each of our households make on average compared to the average AMI population, the average AMI in the county. So the average income, household income in the county is $113,480, whereas in our programs, you see that the average household income is much less. Next slide. We went over our rental assistance programs, primarily focusing, of course, on the voucher program and what we do with that program, as well as mainstream vouchers and emergency housing vouchers. Provided demographics related to our voucher holders. 34% are elderly and 32% are disabled. Again, these are statistics and data that we will go through in closer and discuss it in more detail as we prepare for the strategic planning process. But this is the high level data that we provided in that presentation. And also shared with the committee the number of individuals who are on our waiting list, which is over 36,000 applicants, and how long it takes to obtain a voucher as is in our current cadence, which is 6.5 years. 19% of our voucher holders are still rent burdened, and as this board is aware, this is why we've sought to increase our voucher payment standards. Next slide. We also were asked to come back to the board, to the committee, to provide a progress update on the Housing Production Fund. I'm going to turn it over to Zach Marks, our Chief Real Estate Officer, to share with you a few slides and highlights in regards to what we presented to the committee.
Thank you. For the record, Zach Marks, Chief Real Estate Officer. Next slide. So I think a bit of this will not be new, but just to give you a sense of we highlighted, gave sort of a brief history of how we got to the $100 million. And again, sort of reminded folks what this fund really is, which is a revolving fund that substitutes for what would otherwise be expensive, usually private equity for the construction, right? Which is the construction lease up. And then after 5 years, HOC's long track record and sophistication around permanent financing deals is what pays it back into the fund and allows that fund to revolve into a new deal. And talks about really the core of the fund is around trying to help the county meet our HOC goals, our Metro Washington Council of Governments targets around on housing production, the combination of private sector for-profit and nonprofit production is just simply not enough to hit that 3,400 units a year that we're supposed to be producing as a county. And so the HPF has stood up in response to that as something that doesn't cannibalize those other sources, but is additive to those. And so this 100 million, will help us produce about 6,000 new units over 20 years. We picked 20 years because that's the life of the bond that funds the HPF. What we think are some of the key characteristics of this fund, of course, is that it is HOC majority control or total control, and that, of course, allows us to bring everything that HOC brings to its communities, everything from services to resident protections, and continued investment. So, and so obviously, at a time when everybody's talking about rent stabilization, HOC's been there for a long time. Go to the next slide. And we use this as an exhibit to demonstrate why we think this is a solution to meeting the COG goals. So you can sort of see as you move from left to right across the graph that you can see that HOC is, has been a consistent producer over the last many years, but that what the HPF allows us to do with that second 100 million, you can see the projected starts as a result of that 100 million and how significant that increase is in terms of production, which is of course the intent of the fund. Further overlaid over that, the highest peaks on those graphs are related to demonstrating what state matching could do because of a proposed bill during this session. And what this overall should tell us is that, again, if the private sector is able to produce about 50 to 60% of the county's housing goals every year, then that 40%'s got to come from somewhere else. And what this is showing us is that with this relatively economically efficient fund that the council has produced, that the county has done, in terms of the 100 million, has us some years at 10%, some years at 20%. Of the county's needs, and that once you start to introduce some simple state matching, we actually show the potential to produce closer to 20 to 30%, and that is what's going to close that gap, because we know our nonprofit partners are already doing everything they can, and we know that the for-profit sector makes its economic decisions the way they do. So it really does have to come from this additional source, this new source, this different source. Go to the next slide. And then in terms of the benefits of public ownership, again, it just talks about that this isn't just about producing new units, but because of HOC's ownership and continued ownership, you get that permanent affordability, you get stability for tenants because we follow the voluntary rent guidelines. It's a platform for us to deliver services just like we do throughout our portfolio. And it allows us to support other goals. So we know that these new buildings, we're pushing an envelope on environmental sustainability. And, we just talked about some of the co-location opportunities that we're able to undertake with the county. So the HPF in and of itself is for producing new units, but it really is a platform to bring all of these other elements together in those projects, which is not new for the commission. The commission is consistently taking single programs and then layering as much as it can on top of those things to create these communities. Go to the next slide.
Okay. Before we go into this component, I want to give some context. We've been asked by our county executive as well as county council and many others, what do we need to do to address the affordability crisis here in this county? There's been a lot of discussion over the course of the last few years related to preservation. And as a result of that, Zach and team, as well as our financial advisors and many folks on our team, have really been thinking creatively around how could we emulate what we've done with the Housing Production Fund and create a similar tool that could be utilized for preservation. As you may or may not know, when we move forward with the production fund, our nonprofit partners were not able to take advantage, of course, of that resource. So they often felt as though they needed a resource as well. And so in an effort to be, one, a good partner to address the shortfall and to think through creative solutions around preservation, we provided this presentation in more one-on-one settings with various elected officials. And so we wanted to provide this information, of course, as these discussions are underway, to the board and to the commission so that you all could have an idea and understand kind of some of the discussions that are brewing. None of these terms have been finalized. We're just really in the infancy stage of talking through what this could look like. And we definitely have garnered support from our nonprofit partners in terms of advocating for these resources. And our elected officials have already started to vocalize their support. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Zach, to share more information.
Thank you. Yeah, so next slide, please. So in the same way that we really founded that the whole conversation around the HPF was about targeting a specific number that folks seem to agree on. So in that case, it was the Council of Governments housing targets. And so in this case, what we did was we targeted a recent study around the vulnerability of naturally occurring affordable housing throughout the county. And that 2020 study produced by the planning department suggested both an overall inventory of these kinds of units, and it also suggested how many would be at risk between now and 2030, so really the next 7 years. And so that was where we started, was this idea that there, according to the study, were 7,000 to 11,000 units at risk, NOAA units, naturally occurring affordable housing units, of being lost by 2030. And so we started there and said, okay, well, what does it look like solving that problem? And then we tried to back into what would the acquisition price of every single one of those units be? Again, just trying to set the discussion, the framework of the discussion. So we used two different measures to approximate this. One was looking at some recent naturally occurring preservation closings that, acquisitions that the commission had actually made. And that suggested a purchase price of $236,000 per unit. And we also looked at, as you know, we receive packages under the right of first refusal for every community that trades, and so more than 4 units. And so we obviously took out some of the small ones. We tried to find really apples to apples. So we looked at communities that were built before 2000, because I think for fairly clear reasons, but basically those are newer properties that have not yet reached a vintage where they're starting to become affordable because of their age. And so we sort of arbitrarily said, well, let's look at prior to 2000. We also took out some of the ones that were either only a few units, not really similar to the kinds of properties that I think most people think of when they're thinking of that. And we got to a price of about $310,000. So if you just bought every one of these off that ROFR log, that right of first refusal log, that's about $310,000. And so what this suggested is that if you take the 7,000 to 11,000 units that are at risk, and you take these bookends of 236,000 and 310,000, that the need is somewhere between 1.7 billion and 3.4 billion purchase power. And so we'll go to the next slide. And so we decided to go right in the middle and say, okay, we don't necessarily, the solution doesn't necessarily need to be to buy every single one, but in order to create a funding source that is adequate and to describe what we're trying to do, we've proposed a $2.5 billion acquisition target. That's a lot. So we wanted to then sort of back from that sort of idea of, okay, well, what's the size of the issue? We think the size of the issue is about $2.5 billion over the next 7 years. And so what we wanted to do was create a fund that would attract enough investment to reach that target. And that is, and 7,000 to 11,000 units over the next 7 years was a lot. And so it was actually easy to want to include our nonprofit partners, because we're going to need many hands to lift in order to reach this target and to try to preserve as many of these 7,000 to 11,000 as possible. And so the way this will work is that, or is proposed to work, is that the county would create ultimately a $100 million fund, very similar to the Housing Production Fund. So the target would again be a public portion of about $100 million. And it would effectively stand in for the investment capital that we typically have to provide as the buyer. And then that funding itself will be sufficient to attract ample private investment to be able to reach this $2.5 billion target. So the public fund itself is not a $2.5 billion fund. We don't need to do that. It's this $100 billion used in a strategic way that allows us to raise the necessary capital to do it. But then there's the hard part of actually being able to execute on all that different, those different acquisitions. You have to underwrite every deal responsibly. You have to pick which ones are worth, they're all worth, but can be viably preserved. Which one? Because other properties may need more significant investment. And so we think that a phased rollout of this $100 million fund makes sense, both because of proof of concept, but also to allow both the commission and nonprofits to frankly be ready for this level of funding and this level of execution. And during this period, there'll be an installation of affordability during the whole period. So we will, right now the proposal is for 20 at 50, 10 at MDU level. So after the acquisition, you then build in that affordability. All residents, of course, then get the voluntary rent guideline protections because it's nonprofit HOC owned. And you also get the introduction of services. So again, all those benefits of public ownership. Instead of a 5-year revolution, it's a 7-year revolution to give a little bit more time for ultimately the exit from the use of this money. And we got into some of the specifics of what those exits might look like. But otherwise, it effectively works the same way as the Housing Production Fund, except that it's a little bit longer revolution period. Instead of a 5% loan payment, it's a 2% loan payment. And it stands in really as the top of stack, whereas the Housing Production Fund was really designed to replace the private investment on the construction, on those newly constructed units. Next slide. And so covered most of this, but the general idea here is again, we want a revolving fund because it's not just about solving the next 7 years, but having a fund that exists forever to preserve these units. One that uses public funding in a very strategic way, so that's, you're not going to go to the council and ask them for $2.5 billion. That's not going to happen. But instead using really kind of the same level of commitment that the county made on the HPF. We think we're going to be able to create a tool that can be a large part of the solution that's necessary on the preservation side. And it's ready to execute. So acquisition deals are relatively similar in nature. And so construction deals are, as you know, they take a lot of effort to get started. So this is something that we believe we can actually get to execution really quickly after the funding is available. And it's scalable in the event that the county feels it needs to increase these things in the future. But we think by batching up that $100 million into 2 to 4 fiscal years, we think that's a responsible rollout. And so that a year from now, we can be already showing some successes the same way the commission showed an early success with the laureate on the Housing Production Fund. Council can see that things are working and want to release those additional funds. And I think that's it for this section. Next slide.
Yes. I do want to pause. Of course, this is dense information. We will send this out, but want to pause if there are any questions related to the Preservation Fund concept, as well as any follow-up questions related to the State of Affordable Housing update that we provided, as well as the Housing Production Fund. After this, there will be another very small update, but this is just giving you a snapshot. These are abbreviated versions of the presentations that we have been making to council.
The question that I have on both the HPF and the Preservation Fund, particularly running concurrently, does the private sector have the willingness and the capacity to step in when we do the final financing? I mean, HPF particularly is for construction financing, but when we do final, we're going to need some equity provided, and we don't have it to the extent that it's needed. So is there the capacity out there in terms of private sector dollars to participate and at the same time not kill the affordability of the units?
Yeah, we spent a lot of the 9 to 10 months since the what we're now calling the Impact Preservation Fund, but the Preservation Fund was discussed the last budget year, but really was tabled, and they moved forward with the second 50 for the Housing Production Fund. And so we both know from experience in terms, so for instance, the refinance of the Lindley was an example, one of the first proof of concept of that. So even though the Lindley was not a Housing Production Fund deal, it was effectively what it really went through that phase that you're talking to, which is the phase I'm talking about, which is the phase after construction and lease up, and you need replacement equity for the equity that was really just there for the construction and lease up. So we went through that with the Lindley and got a really good response from a number of different investors, and we ultimately selected one, closed on it, and we're now into that phase. So we've both gone through that ourselves, but we also spent a lot of time with some of the financial firms that we use that give us a good sense of what the market looks like, and based on that, we structured the HPF and also the Impact Preservation Fund in a way based on a lot of the feedback we got from them, to make sure that when these things we get to that point where it's time to revolve them out, that there are ample investors ready to take those properties over.
And at what point do we have, or does the county or whomever conduct some interest fairs, some gatherings of those prospective investors to get them on board, to get them to start feeling like they really want to support and push this? Because some of them might have a positive impact on the council in terms of putting up money, and then they've got to put it up. So at what point do we involve them?
Yeah, well, we have had we've had those kinds of prospective conversations. So we would expect to be able to. We feel comfortable. We can say now that there will be that interest, and in terms of the form in which council might want to see that interest, I think we could provide that form of interest. The other thing with the Preservation Fund is that it really is designed to connect to the kinds of transactions that we're already doing. The battery acquisition, the Bradley acquisition, in the case of MHP recently buying Rolling Wood. And so it's really designed to be fully compatible and just plug into the same sorts of transactions that we've all been executing for the last few years. And so in terms of getting into these transactions, nobody's really doing a whole bunch different. And then with the Preservation Fund, at the end of that 7 years, this is where it gets a little bit more, because the HPF is a very straightforward, we know what it's supposed to look like when we exit. It's supposed to look like what happened with the Lindley. With the Preservation Fund, there could be any number of exits for those properties once preserved. Maybe it goes into a tax credit renovation. Maybe a portion of the property goes into a tax credit renovation. Maybe a portion of the property is redeveloped. Maybe a portion of the property there's a new use introduced that the county was interested in. So there are lots of different ways in which, or there's just a permanent finance put in at that place in the same way that we've done the HPF. And so the extra 2 years is really indicating that, it's not as crystal clear as the HPF was, but we think there are ample ways to preserve these properties in the long term, given 7 years to figure it out.
I mean, it sounds great, and I guess the last question is one we always ask. Do we have the staff bandwidth to do it?
One of the things that, of course, we are proposing with this, if HOC would be the administrator of this, is for admin fees that would cover the staffing needed and the capacity needed to properly support this initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I wondered whether there's a role for some of the smaller nonprofits that purchase housing to house 2 or 3 at a time, Housing Unlimited, CSAC, and so forth, to benefit from this program, and whether they would be expected to take ownership, which these organizations do of many of their homes, but they also lease them. So would we be providing vouchers for those where the residents, they're eligible residents? Is there a way to carve out, I guess is the best way, a benefit for some of these smaller organizations that provide critical service needs and housing needs, benefits to benefit from this preservation program as well? Because again, the locations of many of them are ideal in that they're in older established communities and have access, good public transportation and access to shopping and recreation, etc.
Yeah, so we see two benefits of the preservation fund to some of the smaller nonprofits who obviously aren't going to be, in the market for, a rolling wood. So the first is that when you have ownership through the nonprofits or HOC, you'll have a willingness to allow some of these nonprofits to participate in the same way that we have, we have a nonprofit that, has a few of the units at Metroport, for instance. They don't own the whole building, but there were a dozen units that suited their needs. And of course, because the commission owned it, there was a willingness to work together. So we certainly see an opportunity there where a larger acquisition can have can then create, again, a platform for other people to come in with maybe a slightly different mission, but mission oriented nonetheless, participate together. The other thing that we think the Housing Production Fund and the Preservation Fund do in general is that the HIF, the Housing Initiative Fund, as you all know, is really the answer to many, many questions, right? I mean, it's done so many different kinds of transactions because it's designed to be the answer to the question of how do we make this particular mission goal happen. And what we think the Production Fund and the Preservation Fund actually do is they take transactions that are more standard, right? I mean, in general, the new construction deals, they're somewhat different in terms of maybe the size, but in general, it's the same idea, right? And the Preservation Fund acquisitions are frankly even more similar. And so the need for the need for discretion, the need for spending a lot of time more than just doing the core underwriting and due diligence that these transactions take. It's not it's not as useful. And so we think by pulling these transactions out of the HIF, it actually leaves the HIF for the transactions that absolutely cannot get done, that are bespoke, that are very specific or small or uneconomical, but very valuable from a moral perspective. So it actually clears the HIF up. It gets these transactions that would otherwise be coming to the HIF and would be occupying that discretionary time, and actually clears the way for these other nonprofits to come in with their important projects. Those important projects, as we know, are one-offs, one at a time, and do require a lot of conversation and thought.
Well, I would just like to say, having watched most of these meetings and attended one of them at least, it's extraordinary the leadership that HOC has put out into the public venue, and the respect it has created for the agency as to the capacity for creative thinking and responsible execution. I mean, what has occurred in the last couple of years. You put it together, it's astounding. It's like taking the light out off from under the bush. I mean, we knew we had the capacity, but this legislation, it's now being supported and the ideas that people are grasping as to what can be, I think is just extraordinary, and we've not had that opportunity to do that in the past, and I think that leadership is miraculous.
Thank you. Well, one of the things I think we need to clarify is that while we're talking about the housing production fund and the preservation fund, we clearly have a housing production fund. We are talking about creating a preservation fund. It is not an established entity program yet. So this, because of the work that we've done on the production fund, is why the county executive and the county council came to us and said, we really are interested in looking at what we could do around preservation. And can you give us a recommendation about what that would look like? And so what it looks like is what we were talking about in the preservation fund. It has not been enacted by the county council, nor has any funds been appropriated this year. So we are looking at it in an early stage about the discussion is going on, not only with the county council, but also with our nonprofit partners, who have been also a part of the discussion, because as was stated earlier, the housing production fund was not accessible by our nonprofit partners, while this one would be. So I just want to be clear about that.
Absolutely.
I wanted to add also just I had some comments similar to Jackie's actually on making sure that whatever gets created, and hopefully something does get created, that smaller nonprofits would be able to access it. I guess one of the things I'm thinking about it, and I don't know, to the extent that it has happened in Montgomery County, it might be one of the things that would be interesting to look at, is that, especially in some of these financial downturns, we see hedge funds around the country sort of snapping up a lot of the housing. And it ends up driving up the costs. They convert it to rental housing, ends up driving up costs for everyone else. And they're not interested in preserving affordable housing.
Sure.
And so I think, one of the things to keep in mind with this fund that comes to fruition is it's not just having it available, but being able for nonprofits or others to be able to tap into it very quickly. In order to be able to compete with, the giant hedge funds or others. So, on your earlier presentation, Chelsea, on the snapshot, I thought that was very interesting, and look forward to seeing more of that. When we get to our strategic planning, and I've got a number of ideas for data points that I would like to see. For that, which I'll hold off on for now. For most of those, though, one that I was thinking of while looking at that presentation that I thought I'd bring up is just, it's interesting to see, we compared the demographics of the county to the demographics of HOC residents, and we compared the income levels of the county to income levels of our residents, and it would be interesting to see sort of merging those. Kind of looking at the income range of our residents, the demographics there, combined, and looking at the demographics of the county in that income range. And one of the things I'm thinking about is just, this is just, my hunch. I haven't seen the data, but it might reveal like where we need more outreach to certain communities, and I'm thinking about the Hispanic community in particular. That, I'm making an assumption that the income demographics of that community are probably lower than the county as a whole, and yet they're underrepresented among our residents, and so I don't know, if that's a reflection of sort of, the length of time it takes to turn over and how quickly the demographics of the county has changed. But I think, if if there are communities that need our services and that are not accessing them, that might highlight where we have some work to do.
Absolutely. Yes, we will definitely have an opportunity to look closely at this data, to think about what data we need. Quite frankly, we need some partners in terms of additional data support and analysis support to really get robust information to help inform our strategic planning process. But I do agree with you, Commissioner Merkowitz. It is interesting to see the low number of Hispanic population that we serve. We can make assumptions, some of which may be in terms of our own staffing and who we have going out and doing outreach, or even a willingness to apply for a government program. There's so many areas that are sometimes implicit or even direct inhibitors towards individuals who may look at our programs or the government in a way that they don't feel comfortable. But partnering with organizations and nonprofits that could help us with that outreach, creating materials and communication materials that allow for people to debunk myths and to become really partners that individuals trust as we go through the strategic planning process. Focus group sessions will help us also gain more insight on why someone takes advantage of, applies, doesn't, and what their experiences are. That will also help inform how we can better serve.
I think cultural equity is an issue, particularly too, when we look at for at least 10 years, we weren't building any 3 and 4 bedroom rental units. The only permits issued were 2-bedroom, and yet you've got intergenerational households that can't be accommodated that way unless you force overcrowding, which creates another problem. So I think we need to be looking at our waiting list to see what need they represent, as well as the demographics of our population that we do have. And I think that'll be eye-opening probably for all of us, one way or another.
One of the other things that I think related to this that we need to pursue is renewing a stronger partnership with Park and Planning, because they have a lot of data and they've got a lot of staff and capacity in terms of providing it. So we need to ensure that we're all on the same page and start sharing information. I know that when I was in the department, there were some collaborations that we had. I think that they haven't done as much of that in the recent past as they could or might in the future. And I really think that's a resource that we need to work together on. They've got stuff that would complement what you've shown here.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Let me say, I think it's very clear from the conversation that's going on, there's a lot of interest in what you all have been meeting and having conversations about. But what I'd like to do is I don't want to necessarily cut off part of the discussion, but I would like to advance the agenda, because we get lost in just 4 hours, and it's productive, but we need to make sure that we can continue to have this dialogue.
Absolutely.
About what things are going on. We are positioning HOC in the county and working with our partners about the work of affordability around for our residents, really, who have to benefit from this. So with that, I'm going to ask, thank you for the presentation. Have you finished?
There was only one other slide because we've been presenting a lot, and that will be very quick. We presented just on Monday in regards to home ownership equity and affordability in Montgomery County. Next slide. We, in that presentation, shared the work that we do in regards to providing home ownership loans as well as down payment assistance. Next slide. And we also shared about the programs that we have for our customers. Next slide. We highlighted the work that our Resident Services Division does that you're already aware of, as well as our single family office providing homeownership workshops to our customers. Next slide. We also shared with the council our work in our family self-sufficiency program. Next slide. Talked about the fact that we have the ability to, and our participants have the ability to leverage their voucher for homeownership opportunities, as well as have access to the MPDU program. Next slide. Okay, and then we are back before the council on March 20th to have a deep dive discussion about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And I do appreciate the indulgence. These are all presentations that have taken place in the course of 6 weeks, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And so really want to give kudos to the team. Because this is above and beyond our typical call to duty. Want to thank, of course, our Director of Government Affairs, Ken Silverman, for helping get these presentations together and help prepare us for these presentations. There are wonderful opportunities to spotlight the work we do. We do believe that we're gaining goodwill as a result of doing them. I had to make sure that we provided these presentations to our own board. And so again, thank you, and we will move swiftly through today's agenda.
Yeah. Let me say this, this represents a large volume of presentation decks that you all have been doing. And I hope that you are in fact, memorializing this on our website so that anybody in the public can have access to this information. But what basically, like the last one you reported, is just simply a status report on what we're doing. What efforts we have underway, and I think that's important for the community to know that while the Housing Preservation Fund may be a piece of work in progress, the rest of these things you've been talking about are all things that are in our ongoing day-to-day portfolio, many of which we just don't talk about and don't advertise, and that's consistent with what unfortunately has been the criticism of a lot of agencies like ours across the board. We don't tell our stories well. And so the fact that we are doing that more, I think, is important. People knowing who we are and what we do. Jeff, do you have one comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment before we move on. And just very quickly, I guess, appreciated hearing about all the outreach we're doing with our residents and support there. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind giving us a very quick update on our efforts to revitalize the Resident Advisory Committee and when we might expect to be hearing from them again.
Absolutely. Good news there. We have actually updated their bylaws. We're in the process of planning for the first election for the RAB, the Resident Advisory Board. We are working with our resident services team, our legal division as well, in terms of how to stand up an electronic mechanism for voting and for outreach for individuals who are interested in serving on that board. It is our expectation, and I don't have the date in terms of the time frame in which that will happen, but our goal is to make sure that that board is seated prior to our strategic planning process. They would be a key partner as we go through this process, and of course, we want to make sure that we're fully engaging the residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is the Commissioners Exchange. You might go ahead, Jack.
We focused on the big picture now. I would like, just for a minute, I've had an opportunity to find something on Independence Now's website that I'd like to share because it drills down to really why we're here and what we're doing. In February of 2020, a 50-year-old woman, Barbara, became very ill, fell into a coma, and had a stroke. After open heart surgery, she was sent to a nursing facility in the county where she was placed into a nursing home to heal and get back to talking, walking with a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, and a speech therapist. Being in rehab for 2 years changed her life. Setting her back from the real world was depressing. I couldn't find anyone to help me or tell me that the nursing home was not going to be the rest of my life. She was in her 50s and she knew she didn't want to live the rest of her life in a nursing home. The Center for Independent Living has a nursing facility transition program that they work with us, and they have 50 adults that are now in nursing homes that don't require nursing care. But particularly for Barbara, what changed her life completely was knowing that an agency called Independence Now could step in and assist her to get back into the real world and to live among the living again. Independence Now reached out to her and started the application process for housing. Early in the summer, she got a Chromebook through the CARES Act funding, got internet access, and in August, she was called up for a housing unit under the Community Choice Homes program with HOC. The staff supported her with her apartment application and applying for food stamps and her security deposit and her first month's rent. A grant from Walmart was secured to provide the furnishings for her independent housing. And she now has completed her successful transition and says, I thank God for making it possible to give me the hope and courage to believe that the door to my life has been opened again. I'm grateful and thankful and blessed. And thank you for accepting me as a human being. That's what we do. That's why we're here. And over and over again, now, knowing the optimist in me that you all recognize, I'm looking to those other 50 that are still in the nursing home. But think of the economic impact of taking nursing home costs to Medicare and Medicaid to the value of a voucher. It's staggering. And I just, when I read that, I just had to share it.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you.
One of the other things that is usually done at this March meeting following our election of officers in February is a discussion around our committees. We have 3 committees of the commission. And given the status of what's going on right now related to the reappointment of some of our commissioners and things like that, I'm going to continue the current structure and membership on our committees as they are now, and we will revisit this in 90 days. See what we do. Okay. With that, no other matters. I will proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes. And we have approval of the minutes for the meeting of February the 1st, the closed session for February the 1st, the special session for February 17th, and a closed session for February the 17th. Can I get a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. Are there any questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. We have on our next item, the consent agenda. There are 3 items represented by resolutions 23-11, 23-12, and 23-13. We will take each of these individually. And first of all, I ask for a recommendation for, a motion to approve resolution 23-11, which is the approval of the collective bargaining agreement wage reopener between the HOC and the municipal and county government employees organization for fiscal year 2023. Can I get a motion?
Commissioner Byrd, so moved.
Moved. Second. And probably seconded. Are there any questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion is carried unanimously. Second item is resolution 23-12, which is the approval of the fiscal year annual pay increments and general wage adjustment for non-represented merit system staff for fiscal year 2023. Can I get a motion to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Second. Your second?
Commissioner Byrd, second.
Oh, and seconded? Any questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously. The next item is resolution 23-13, the approval of the Alexandra Nasser Brownstone and Eileen Fitzgerald, the board of directors of the Housing Opportunities Communities Partners Incorporated. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
The probably move next second to approve resolution 23-13. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries unanimously. We will now go into the committee reports and recommendations. We will start off with our Budget and Finance Committee, which is chaired by Commissioner Nelson.
The first item on the agenda from the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee is the fiscal 2023 second quarter budget to actual statements. And the staff is recommending acceptance of the second quarter FY23 budget to actual statements. And I will turn this over to our executive director to begin the process.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. I'm going to turn it over to our finance team. But before doing so, just want to indicate that when we presented recently to the Budget Finance Audit Committee, we were asked to think about how we can deliver this presentation in a way that puts things in context. And I'm pleased to share that Tim Getzinger, our acting CFO, will do that introduction, set things in context for us before we get into some of the more details. We also look forward to having more matrix and pretty pictures in the future, so stay tuned. But I'll turn it over to Tim Getzinger, our acting CFO, to provide you with an overview, followed by Terry Fowler, our budget officer.
Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you, Commission. And I will try to provide you with a quick snapshot on HOC's financial status. HOC's finance team provides quarterly reporting on key financial metrics such as liquidity ratios, reserves, and fund balances. We report on a variety of topics, including budgets to actuals, budget amendments, a review of uncollectible receivable accounts, and overall agency financial position. We also monitor macroeconomic factors, including interest rates and inflation, to better understand the ever-changing fiscal landscape. Based upon feedback from the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee, we will be working on presenting additional key metrics in a manner that allows the board to easily ascertain the financial position of the agency. Although there are fluctuations in certain areas, HOC's financial health remains positive and stable. Key liquidity ratios, including quick and current ratios, are up from the end of the fiscal year. And although the cash ratio is down, the reduction is nominal and well within a healthy range. Reserves, including the general fund operating and property reserves, are both healthy and are at or above last year's levels. A review of our 8 revolving development funds, in which we examine current year performance and project 2 years of activity, including new potential commitments, and the timing of revenue receipt, also demonstrate stability. As you are aware, or you will be aware, on April 5th when we present our recommended budget, the Housing Choice Voucher Program and rent collection are the agency's 2 largest sources of income. As stated earlier, housing assistance payment utilization continues to trend upwards and sits at 96%. That's up from 92.6, I think, this time last year. So it's a big jump. Finally, the voluntary rent guideline based upon the rental component of the Consumer Price Index for the Washington metropolitan area, which essentially provides limits to what we can charge in rent, was recently released and increased significantly from 0.4% last year to 5.8% this year. That said, we all understand that COVID has impacted property performance in several key areas, including rent collection, maintenance, especially deferred maintenance, and increased utilities, whether it be based upon rate increases or utilization. This is across the board, though. It's industry-wide. It's not just HOC, but we are taking steps to address these issues. As Executive Director Andrews mentioned earlier this evening, HOC met with partners and has held several work sessions to address rent collections and to promote available resources. This month, we are applying our rental assistance resources to recover a sizable portion of our arrearages. However, we need tenants to pay rent. There's no way around it. In terms of other key property performance areas, we onboarded an asset management guru, John Wilhoit, Director of Asset Management, who has hit the ground running, and he's looking into key property metrics to boost performance. We are also looking to invest in technology and systems to create a more agile and data-driven decision-making environment. We expect that these measures will respond to the aforementioned issues and positively impact property and agency financial performance. And are there any questions before we get into the?
Thank you for being responsive to the request of the BF&A committee.
You're very welcome, and I try to be quick, but as quick as I can.
And I mean, I think that helps in terms of putting it into context. I appreciate it.
And likewise expressing my appreciation because I know the nudges, but and I also appreciated you circling back to some of the discussion Chelsea mentioned earlier with the good news of a number of different resources that seem to be coming our way. And I was just curious. I know what we're about to hear is sort of on the past 6 months, but I'm assuming I don't know, were any of those built into our projections, or should all of this presumably will just have net positive impact? It's not going to.
You're talking about our.
Well, whether it's the FEMA, the CDBG, the the county council money for WSSC and Elizabeth House demolition.
So we're looking to put the rental arrears money in this month, assuming we get all of it in. It'll be reflected in the next quarterly report, but it really has to do with when it's reported,
right,
and when it gets into the system, because March 31st is going to be the deadline for showing exactly where we are in the quarter. But yes, everything that we've presented is net positive. Yes.
That's great.
Because that wasn't chicken feed.
Yeah.
So.
So the item for us,
All right, do you have anything else you're going to add, or has he stolen your thunder?
What he's telling you is how we're going to address what I would say is where we are behind, where we thought we would be at this time due to lower income in the general fund, but we've had savings in expenses. And in our properties, Tim did address, and I should say for the record, I am Terry Fowler, the budget officer. Tim did mention that we have had higher maintenance costs and bad debt. It is the anticipation that the rental assistance will help alleviate some of that higher bad debt. It will take some time, however, for all of this to work through and get into our financials and truly on the cost side, determine what is due to just higher costs due to inflation and what is the cost associated with us recovering from COVID and getting back into the units and doing work that needed to be done. We do think we will turn in a positive direction due to the items that he mentioned, but it may be a slow race before we get there.
And for the benefit of my colleagues, the discussion that we had at the BFNA was that as you read the budget to actual statements, you can read them and think maybe we're unsuccessful in what we're doing because of some of the shortfalls. But the question that we asked was, what's the prospect in terms of the future? And can we in fact put that into context so that even though maybe the numbers are not looking as great for this quarter, we know something's coming down the road that we will end up the year substantially as we had anticipated and not necessarily in bad shape. And I just wanted us to be able to hear that as you get the real nitty gritty of the numbers. And that was the attempt that they successfully tried. So with that, I would move approval of resolution 2314, which is the acceptance of second quarter FY23 budget to actual.
I second that.
it's been probably moved in second to approve resolution 2314. Are there any questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. Motion carries unanimously. Next item.
The next item is the fiscal 2023 second quarter budget amendment. The approval of the 2023 second quarter budget amendment. And again, I'll turn it over to the executive director.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. I'll turn it back over to Timothy Getzinger, our acting chief financial officer, to share this minor adjustment that we're proposing.
Thank you. And presenting this item will be Terry Fowler, our budget officer.
Thank you. This is a pro forma budget amendment that we do each year. The administrative costs for both our multifamily and single family bond funds are covered by a draw from the respective bond funds. And at the end of each fiscal year, we look to whether the drawn funds were fully used in the prior year. We have cumulative savings in both of those, and so that savings will be carried forward to cover a portion of the FY23 cost, thereby reducing the additional draws needed. There's no change to the total operating budget. It is simply a swap of the source of the funds for these administrative costs. And I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Are there any questions that anybody has? I would move then approval of resolution 2315, approval of the FY23 second quarter budget amendment.
Commissioner Byrd, I second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve resolution 2315. Are there any questions? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. Resolution is approved unanimously. Next item.
The next item is the request to write off uncollectible tenant accounts receivable October 1, 2022 to December 31, 2022. And I'll turn it over to Executive Director Andrews.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the staff to turn to page 59. Thank you. All right. And I'll turn it back over to Tim Getzinger, our acting CFO, to provide this recommendation.
Thank you, Executive Director Andrews. Again, for the record, Tim Getzinger, acting CFO and Chief Development Funds Officer. For this item, the agency's current policy is to provide for an allowance for any tenant accounts receivable balance which is older than 90 days. On a quarterly basis, staff recommends to the Commission to write off uncollectible receivables from past tenants. The proposed write-off for the second quarter of fiscal year 2023 amounted to $49,256, an increase of $36,602 compared to the previous quarter. The primary reasons for the write-offs across the properties include tenants who passed away, no longer qualify for their respective housing program, were in non-compliance status with program requirements, moved to a nursing home, relocated out of state, skipped, and voluntarily vacated their units. The next anticipated write-off of former tenant uncollectible accounts receivable balances will be for the third quarter of FY23, which will cover the period from January 1st, 2023 to March 31st, 2023. The Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee reviewed this request at its meeting on February 17th, 2023, and joined staff in its recommendation to approve the proposed write-off of uncollectible former tenant balances for the second quarter of FY23, which totals $49,256. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Is there any capacity to recover any of these funds from the funds that are pending? Are there people that we were going to write off that may now not need to be written off, or?
So these are for tenants who are no longer residents here, and we can't use any of that money for it. But we do have a collections agency that we can then provide this information to, which can look to recoup.
If there are no other questions, I would move approval of resolution 23-16, the write-off of uncollectible tenant accounts receivable from October 1, 2022 to December 31, 2022.
I second.
It has been properly moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposers, nay. The motion carried unanimously. Next item.
The next item from the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee is the request of staff to have approval to extend the maturity dates for the draws on the PNC Bank real estate line of credit, which financed the commission-approved action related to the residences on the lane and HOC at Garnkirk Farms.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Nelson. This is a request that we advanced to the BF&A committee in regards to addressing the current maturity date as it pertains to the RELOC loan that was provided, the bridge loan that was provided for residents on the lane. I'll turn it over to Tim Getzinger, our acting CFO, to provide more details related to this request.
Thank you again, Executive Director Andrews and the Commission. This is the last item from the DFNA Committee. The Commission
That with joy.
this is the last item for the DFNA Committee. The Commission has previously approved advances from the PNC Bank Real Estate Line of Credit, also known as the RELOC, as interim financing during the acquisition and construction of Upton 2, now known as Residences on a Lane, and to cover pre-development expenses of HOC at Garnkirk Farms LLC. As of December 31st, 2022, total principal balance from these draws was about $7.6 million for Residences on a Lane and $1.9 million for the HOC at Garnkirk Farms. The authorization from the Commission for the use of the PNC RELOC will expire on March 2023 and May 2023 for Residences on a Lane and HOC at Garnkirk. The estimated total annual cost related to these advances is approximately $442,000 based upon PNC RELOC's contractual taxable borrowing rates. The requested extensions are coterminous with the PNC RELOC maturity date, which is September 30th, 2024, but balances are expected to be repaid prior to then. Residences on the Lane is expected to repay RELOC in the second quarter of calendar year 2023, and Garnkirk is expected to repay summer 2024. The Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee reviewed this request at its meeting on February 17th, 2023, and joined staff in its recommendation to extend the use of the PNC RELOC through September 30th, 2024. To the Finance Commission approved actions related to Residences on the Lane and Garnkirk Farms. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Is the date December or September 30th?
It's September 30th, 2024. I'm sorry if I misspoke. That's when the RELOC expires, and that's when the request to extend these maturities is, if I stated it incorrectly.
Yeah, okay. The motion?
There's a motion, I move that we approve resolution 23-17, extending the line of credits.
Second.
It has been probably moved and seconded to approve resolution 23-17. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Resolution approved unanimously. Thank the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee for its work, and the staff also for providing information that has been requested by the Commission staff, committee. So thank you very much for that. And we'll proceed now with the final committee report coming from the Development and Finance Committee, chaired by Commissioner Simon.
And we will pick up where we left off with the Finance Committee to approve to reinstate and extend the maturity date of the bridge line Upton 2. And Mr. Shepherd, I believe this is your birthday. What a way to spend it.
I couldn't think of a better way to spend it, actually.
I'll
Oh, wow. I can think of a couple other ways. That's why I'm blushing.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to open you for that.
It's okay.
So our executive director will
Yes.
refer it on.
Yes, thank you. This is the companion resolution, and I will turn it over to our real estate team, Jay Shepard, our housing acquisition manager, and ask Tim Getzinger, our acting CFO, to also stay put as this discussion is underway related to extending the maturity date of the bridge loan. And I'll turn it over to Jay.
Okay, thank you so much, Director Andrews. And for the record, I am Jay Shepard, Housing Acquisition Manager in HOC's Real Estate Development Division. And I was the development manager for the design and construction of the Residences on the Lane, which is a 150 unit age-restricted high-rise apartment community in downtown Rockville that was recently completed construction and started lease up in 2022. So back in early 2019, prior to the construction starting, the Commission approved the Residences on the Lane financing plan, which included, among other sources, an unsecured bridge loan note from the Commission to HOC for up to $12 million, drawn from the Commission's PNC Bank Real Estate Line of Credit, or RELOC. This note funds project costs during construction and specifically bridges the receipt of low-income housing tax credit equity contributions that are received at various stages throughout the project, but mostly in bulk after construction is completed and stabilization of the property is achieved. The terms of the bridge note specifically specified a maturity date on the earlier of a specific date, in this case, August 28th, 2022, which was 42 months after the commencement or closing. August 20th, so that was 42 months after the commencement, or by payment in full of all the LIHTC equity proceeds. So it had these provision either by a certain date or if LIHTC equity proceeds had been fully contributed. At the time of closing in 2019, HOC staff had projected that these equity installments would be paid before that loan matured in August of 2022. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting unexpected delays in construction, the final LIHTC equity installment will not be made until later in 2023. And as Tim had mentioned, it's going to be in the second quarter of this year, 2023. Therefore, the effective maturity date of August 22nd, 2022 must be reinstated and extended to meet the requirements of the low-income housing tax credit investor. The Development and Finance Committee considered this item at its meeting on February 24th, 2023, and supported staff's recommendation that the Commission approve the reinstatement and amendment of the bridge loan note that extends the maturity date to the earlier of the date of the LIHTC investor having contributed all its LIHTC equity installments to the borrower, or to the acceleration of the bridge loan note due to default pursuant to its terms. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about that.
If there are no questions, the committee considered this and recommends to our colleagues that we adopt resolution 2318, approving to reinstate and extend the maturity date of the bridge of 12 million for the residences on the lane. And I so moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to approve resolution 2318. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those nay. The resolution is approved unanimously.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Pursuant and happy birthday. Pursuant to section 3-305B and D of the General Provisions Article of the Annotated Code of Maryland, I move to adopt the written closing statement dated March the 8th, 2023, and to adjourn this open session to a closed session to discuss 3 topics. First topic is a potential purchase or lease of commercial office space located in Silver Spring and Rockville. This topic is being discussed in a closed session to protect HOC's ability to negotiate with various third parties. The statutory section that allows this meeting to be closed is section 3-305B3. The second topic is the terms of a ground lease for a third party. The reason this topic is being discussed in a closed session is that the discussion will contain confidential commercial and financial information provided by a third party. Section 4-335 of the Maryland Public Information Act prevents disclosure of such information. The statutory section that allows this meeting to be closed is section 3-305B13. The third topic is the discussion of potential litigation at a property located in Silver Spring. This topic is being discussed in closed session in order to protect HOC's attorney-client privilege and other interests. Section 4-301A1 of the Maryland Public Information Act prevents disclosure of information if, by law, the information is privileged. The statutory section that allows this topic to be discussed in closed session are sections 3-305B7, 3-305B8, and 3-305B13. If a member of the public that is watching this meeting in real time on YouTube wishes to object to the closed meeting, please comment in the YouTube chat box or contact HOC's General Counsel. Instructions can be found in the Open Meeting Act objection procedures, which is posted on the HOC's website. Do I have a second?
Second.
Been probably moved and seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. We are now adjourning and moving to a closed session.
Thank you, Commissioners.